Today we're going to be talking about adding rational numbers. We're going to be asking ourselves, how can you add a rational number? The first thing we're going to look at is adding rational numbers with the same sign. Again, remember, you're going to be writing down everything I write down on my notes, so your notes should look exactly like mine, and any questions you have in the margin so that we can go over them tomorrow in class. So when we add rational numbers with the same sign, we apply the rules for adding integers. The sum has the same sign as the sign of the rational numbers. So let's look at an example. Malaki hikes for 2.5 miles and stops for lunch. Then he hikes for 1 5/10 more miles. How many miles did he hike altogether? Well, altogether means add. And the first thing I want to do is use positive numbers to represent the distance that Malaki hiked. He hiked 2.5 miles, and then he hiked an additional 1.5 miles. So we're going to start at 2 5/10 here on the number line. And since we're adding, we always move to the right. So we're going to add 1 5/10. So since we're adding a positive number, we move to the right. We move from 2.5 plus 1 is 3.5, plus another half is all the way to 4, and we get to 4 and we stop. So 2 5/10 plus 1 5/10. 5 plus 5 is 10. Carry your 1. 2 plus 1 is 3 plus 1 is 4. They just use a number line here to show you, but you can also do your simple addition, and when you add those numbers together, you get 4 miles total. All right, let's look at a second example. Kyle pours out 3/4 liter of liquid from a beaker. Then he pours out another ½ liter of liquid. What is the overall change in the amount of liquid in the beaker? Well, since he's pouring the liquid out, it's going to be a negative number. So what is the overall change? It's going to be negative because we're pouring the liquid out of the beaker. So you want to use negative numbers to represent the amount of change each time Kyle pours liquid from the beaker. So the first one is -3/4, and then we're adding an additional -1/2. Okay, so there's a few things here. We're going to be adding two negative numbers, and we're going to be adding denominators with unlike terms. So the first thing we need to do is get these denominators to be alike. You cannot add like terms without like denominators. You always need a common denominator when adding or subtracting fractions. You always need a common denominator when you're adding or subtracting fractions. Well, I need to look at these two numbers. I have a 4 and a 2, and I need to find a common denominator. Well, I know that 2 fits into 4, so my common denominator can be 4. And that's going to be the least common denominator. So 4 times 1 gives me 4. So I multiply -3 times 1, and I keep a -3. Plus, what do I do to 2 to get to 4? Well, I multiply it by 2. So I have to multiply it by 2. 2 times 2 is 4. -1 times 2 is -2. So I have -3/4 plus -2/4. Well, I know since my signs are the same, a -3 and a -2, I'm just adding. -3 plus -2 equals -5. And I always keep my denominator the same, and it stays a 4. So I have -5/4. And if I want to change that to a mixed number, I divide. 5 divided by 4 goes in one time with 1 left over. So I have 1. This number becomes my numerator. It goes on the top. and the 4 is my denominator, so I have negative 1 and 1/4. That should be my answer. Let's look here at the number line and see if that's the same thing. So I start at negative 3/4. These are all, this is negative 1/4, negative 2/4, negative 3/4. It's broken into fourths. I start at negative 3/4 and I move a half. So I move, this is 1/4, and I have to move another fourth. So I've moved an additional negative half, and I end up at negative 1 and 1/4. Negative 1 and 1/4, and that's the same answer I got when I did the addition over here. So my answer is negative 1 and 1/4 liters. So it's important to remember when you're adding fractions with unlike denominators that you always have to find a common denominator. You can either figure out the smallest number that they both go into, or you could multiply the two of them and get 8 as your common denominator, and then you would just have to reduce your fraction at the end. So either way works, you just have to figure out which way is easier or works best for you. All right, here's a reflection question that I want you to think about and write down your answer. How do you determine whether to move right or left on the number line when adding rational numbers? How do you determine whether to move right or left on the number line when adding rational numbers? And we're going to talk about those answers tomorrow.